Australia's autism crisis is escalating, and tonight we have the numbers to prove it. Almost 300,000 Australians are now receiving NDIS funding for autism. That's double the figure from just 5 years ago. And taxpayer spending has exploded to $9.2 billion a year. That's more than twice what it cost in 2020 to 2021, making autism the single most expensive disability within the $50 billion a year scheme. Now, it is a staggering spike, and it's now become the justification the federal government is using to move children with mild to moderate autism off the NDIS and into its new Thriving Kids Early Intervention Program. And I'm not a fan of that. But the states are pushing back, furious at being asked to co-fund the $4 billion a year scheme, and even more furious that it's been tied to a hospital funding deal. Look, there's no doubt this is a financial issue. There is a big financial issue involving this. But a guest on Sky News on Monday raised questions about why rates are increasing.
Are autism rates increasing? Maybe we should look at why. Are we just using more sensitive tools? They were always there and now we're better at picking it up. But we have to have the conversation, and very uncomfortable, I think, conversation, that the diagnostic criteria has significantly widened and that we have linked financial incentives to getting a diagnosis.
Now, I'm going to come back to that financial incentives line in a moment. But first, why is it an issue if we're better at picking up autism? How many kids have slipped through the system because they were on the spectrum and it was never recognised, and they've struggled with life, whether they've turned to alcohol or drugs to try and cope? We're now saying that, the money's too much, so basically maybe these kids can just piss off, Unless you're severely autistic or severely disabled, you don't deserve the help. So we create a bigger problem that becomes a health issue, and our public health system suffers as a result. The whole point of the NDIS is about helping kids, especially, prepare for life. Now, Claire Rowe, who was in that last clip, and Chris Kenny, the host, they elaborated on the idea of parents shopping around for a diagnosis. Have a look at this.
As you've explained before, there are various levels of autism as well, and if there's a diagnosis about a lower level of autism, parents can be in the situation where they might need to fund some extra activities or education or programs themselves. But if that diagnosis can be lifted to the NDIS level, then of course government pays that. So there is a perverse incentive there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what happens when we financially incentivise not just the attainment of a medical diagnosis, but we financially incentivise people of staying unwell. And so when the government announces they're going to fix this by this Thriving Kids model and different programs, it has to be built on a fairer foundation, and it has to be not linked with the diagnosis in the first place, rather linked to functional impairment or support that people need. And as you said, autism is real. Those people need genuine support. I'm always an advocate for the voices that I don't think are at the table, and they are the parents of the profoundly disabled child. They are very rarely listened to. The loudest voices are much more mild cases because we have a system that financially rewards it, and it blurs the line between genuine disability, which is what the NDIS, after all, is set up to support, and developmental variation, some mild social difficulties that with a little bit of intervention and support may improve and in fact go away altogether. But clinicians feel squeezed and pressured and have readily admitted to me that they have diagnosed autism for what they described as grey cases that may not have fulfilled traditional autism criteria, but they don't want to turn parents away with no support at all.
But if they're grey cases, isn't it better to err on the side of caution? And this seems very biased towards, they think it's a cash grab. I've never met one person with a kid on the spectrum who has seen the NDIS as a cash grab. They have certainly seen it as a way of getting help. Families get torn apart. You don't just need to be severely on the spectrum or autistic to be struggling with the consequences of autism. These people don't understand the nuance of what's going on. Families are struggling and need help. Now, they always come back to the rorters, and I agree that rorters need to be hung, strung, and quartered. No one's disagreeing with that. But former Senator Sky Kokoschky-Moore, she says families who've always relied on the NDIS need confidence they won't be pushed into a poor cousin version of support. And that's what I think is what's going to happen with Mark Butler's Family First, or whatever it's called, driving kids. I think this is just trying to bring down the budget of the NDIS, and people are going to be left behind. Chris Kenny has money. If his kid needs something, he'll be able to afford it. He'll be able to get those extra bits. He seems to be saying that, well, people are going on the NDIS to get help with the costs of some of the things they might just have to put up with themselves. That is going to lead to longer term consequences. And look, I don't think Chris or Claire are trying to come down on people. This is a very hard topic. But autism experts warn families are already under enormous strain. There are cost of living pressures, housing stress, and recent NDIS rule changes making support harder to access. Now, Claire had a point. Why are our autism rates going up? That is a very fair question. I don't think it's just because we've widened what it means to be on the spectrum. I think is it because of the food we're eating, the chemicals, the processed stuff? I don't know the answer. But until we figure that out, let's not punish the kids who are falling into these categories. We need to find a way to answer Claire's very good question. Why are autism rates going up? ADHD rates going up? I have ADHD. When I was a kid, no one really acknowledged it, and it was only those extreme cases where you would see video footage in the house on a current affair and the kids were running around wild and destroying everything. I was never at that level. But ADHD has affected my life. It has had a huge consequence on my employment, my relationships, every part of my life. I now get help through medication and an understanding. But when I was a kid, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on before I was 45, maybe older. And I didn't understand why things were happening to me that were happening. Would you deny a kid like me the access and the help we can get now to help them have a better life? Well, I think you're pretty screwed up if the answer to that is yes. If you would deny them, where's your humanity?
We've invited you here. You don't need to apologise for your story or for what you're saying. I heard the yapping. There was a lot I didn't understand about myself until I had that diagnosis. Don't get the shitties with me. Oh, Guy. No, that's Guy.